Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom, and you can pre-order all of the Strixhaven cards you need right now by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Strixhaven spoilers, and oh my goodness, do we have some cards to talk about today. Some of the most interesting, biggest, splashiest effects that we've maybe ever seen in Magic. So we'd probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Strixhaven cards. And first up today, we got a card that quite literally made my jaw drop when I saw it. Body of Research. Triple green, triple blue. So 6 mana altogether, sorcery. Create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of cards in your library. So what this means, if you don't want to think about it too hard, is in Standard, if you cast this on time, you're probably getting a 45/45, let's say, somewhere in that neighborhood for 6 mana. In Commander, you're probably getting like an 80/80 or something, which is absolutely obscene. It is making the biggest creature we have ever seen for its mana cost in the entire history of the game. Like, seriously, it is ridiculously huge. The thing is, I'm honestly not sure how good this is. There's been this age-old question about whether just being big is good enough. Like, it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have haste, it doesn't have an ETB. If your opponent just kills it, you kind of spent 6 mana on nothing. Is just being so big that you kill your opponent in one single attack in essentially any format for 6 mana gonna be enough to make Body of Research into a staple in formats? We're gonna have to find out. So I think this is a card. It's got some really sweet upsides, and it's got some pretty big drawbacks that makes it worse than a quote-unquote real creature, since you're getting this token. So first off, I mean, there are shenanigans. We've seen like Tanzir Quandrix in Standard, doubling up counters. You cast this, make it 45/45, then you can Tanzir it and make a, I don't know, 90/90 or something. Not that your token needs to be bigger than it already is, but there are some synergies there, proliferating to add more counters or whatever. It's also the easiest way, I think, to guarantee you can win with Fling or Kazul's Fury or Thud. Like, get up to 7 mana or 8 mana or 9 mana and you cast this and just immediately Thud it. That should kill basically anyone. And one of the great things about Body of Research is it works in the mid game as well. Like, even if the game goes along, you draw some cards, you're still going to get what? A 30/30, a 40/40 most of the time, which seems really, really powerful, really, really easy to win with like the Fling plan. It also is great if you can give it Trample and Haste. Like, for example, we have Kenrith in Standard. 1 red mana, all creatures gain Trample and Haste. If you have a Kenrith out and you play this and have an extra mana, you just haste it in, smash your opponent. They're probably just going to be straight up dead, even if they have a bunch of blockers, or a Chroma's Memorial in Commander or Historic. So there are ways to turn this into an incredibly devastating one-shot kill. You don't get to untap machine because the creature is just so unbelievably big. So that's the upside of Body of Research. Also, if you want to take the Simic Ascendancy challenge, this is the easiest way to just get 20 counters. You play Simic Ascendancy, you play Body of Research, you're guaranteeing yourself 20 or more counters, then you just got to get to your next upkeep and you're going to win the game. So that's kind of like a combo, quote-unquote. Although remember, you still got to make it to your upkeep with Simic Ascendancy on the battlefield. So that's something worth building around a little bit. On the other end, there are some big drawbacks to the fact that rather than being an actual legitimate honest-to-God creature, this is a 0/0 fractal token that gets a bunch of counters. For example, Bounce deals with it forever, and that's something I'm worried about in Standard. You make this massive creature, and your opponent's just like, sure, Brazen Borrower. If it was a real creature, it goes back to your hand, you recast it the next turn, but since it's a token, it's going away forever. The same with Quandrix Command, Cyclonic Rift in Commander. Also, there's a lot of weird ways to interact with it. Fatal Push kills it, even though it's a 6-drop, because it actually has a CMC of 0. Or if you play this in Historic, you gotta watch out for Claim the Firstborn, just yoinking it, beating you down. Same in Standard, I guess, really. Solemnity prevents counters from going on things, so it makes it do nothing. So there are ways you can get really punished for this. I do think this has a chance to be heavily played in Simic token commander decks, although it's worth pointing out it's actually a little bit awkward when it comes to like Adrix and Nev in doubling season effects, because with a Adrix and Nev, the way that Body of Research is worded, you're making a 0/0 token, and then Body of Research itself is putting a bunch of counters on it. If you copy that, you're not going to get the counters from Body of Research. You're just going to get a 0/0 fractal, so it doesn't actually synergize as well as I would like with things like Adrix and Nev or doubling season, but maybe that's a good thing. And the fact that you can make this absolutely massive token, and there's +1/+1 counter synergies, makes me think this is still going to be a staple in decks like Adrix and Nev, and Coma decks, other Simic decks that care about tokens. So Body of Research, I mean, this card's insane. It is one of the cards I am most excited to build around, although I'm honestly not sure if this is like a legit staple style card, or because of the weaknesses to removal, because of the weaknesses to hate, because of killing yourself with Claim the First board, if this is more just an against odds style card. But I expect that we're going to be playing this in the near future, trying to fling it at people, copy it with Thousand Year Storm, whatever ridiculousness can ensue, because this card can do some insane things that we have never seen a card do before. Speaking of interesting mythics, we also got Crackle with Power, a double red and triple X. It deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So to understand how this works, to cast it at all, you need 5 mana. So 5 mana, you would deal 5 times 1 damage. So that would be, 5 damage to 1 target, which I guess that's okay. 5 damage to any target for 5 mana. Good and limited. The exciting part of this card, though, is how quickly it scales when you get up to 8, 11, 14 mana. At 8 mana, it's going to deal 10 damage to each of 2 targets. If you get up to 11 mana, you're doing 15 to 3 targets. And then the sweet spot, if you get to 14 mana, 20 damage to up to 4 targets, which means you kill your opponent in Standard, and of course if you get even more mana, you can kill the table in Commander. So it's an interesting take on a burn spell. It's inefficient compared to things like Banefire and Comet Storm at most spots on the curve. On the other hand, it is the easiest way to deal 20 damage to your opponent's face. Like, we don't have a card that is 14 mana, kill your opponent from 20. So if that's what you're trying to do, Banefire, Comet Storm, all the other similar versions of this are not actually going to get it done. And I think that's the power of the card. Also, in Standard, pretty cute with like Fiery Emancipation, where you're getting like 5 times the damage that is also tripled. I don't want to do the math, but it's going to be a lot of damage. Do the weird snowbally shenanigans with Toralf Got a Fury, throwing around your excess damage. So there are sweet shenanigans in Commander, in Standard with this card. And in Standard, I mean, you can ramp into it. I don't know if this will be a competitive plan, but we've seen Teamer ramp decks easily get up to 7 mana and cast Genesis Ultimatum. And then Genesis Ultimatum puts a bunch more lands into play a lot of the time. It doesn't seem unrealistic that you could have this be a 15 damage, 20 damage to your opponent lethal burn spell in a deck that ramps enough. The downside is it is pretty inefficient in the early game. Like, if 5 mana, it's maybe an okay limited removal spell. At 8 mana, it starts to get pretty interesting, but still isn't insane. The other thing worth mentioning about this card is it is a infinite mana payoff that kills everyone in a format like Commander. So if you're going like Zerta, Basalt Monolith, you make infinite mana, you cast this, you can target all your opponents with as much damage as you want, so it does scale easily as an infinite mana payoff as well. Plus, I mean, it's a spell, so you can like Thousand Years Storm it, Dual Caster Mage it, Rouse Storms Conduit it, and it will maintain its mana value even if you copy it. So if you pay 11 mana, each of the copies is also going to have the same amount of X on it. So Crackle with Power, I'm excited that this is the cheapest way to burn your opponent for 20. On the other hand, it's not super exciting if you're casting it without a ton of mana, which means I'm not sure where this card falls. Is it a Standard staple, because you can kill your opponent with 1 card if you ramp enough? Is it more just a janky Commander card? I lean towards the latter, but it is worth taking note of, because, like I said, there's not another card in Magic that can 20 your opponent for less mana than Crackle with Power. So in that regard, it's pretty exciting, even if you do need to have a lot of mana to make it work. Next on our list, we have a pretty interesting and potentially powerful 2-drop, Leonin Lightscribe. So 2 mana 2/2, Cat Cleric, Magecraft. When you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So essentially, a 2-drop that has prowess itself, well, Magecraft, but close enough, and also has prowess for your entire team. There isn't a super close direct comparison to this, like Jeskai Ascendancy, I guess, does it as an enchantment, essentially. Adliz does it, but only for wizards. Monastery Mentor kinda does something similar by making tokens that also have prowess, but we've never really seen this 2-drop that gives mass prowess to everything, and that's essentially what Leonin Lightscribe does. So if you make a big board of tokens and then cast some spells, they're going to get huge and kill your opponent. In Standard, we keep coming back to this, and I feel like it's come up a lot, and that's because there's a lot of 2/2s for 2 with sweetness in Strixhaven, but I am a little concerned of how this will work in Standard when you have Bone Crusher Giant running around, which is really good at sniping things like Leonin Lightscribe, but if it sticks around, it can win the game really quickly, and because of the weird Magecraft theme being split across colors in Strixhaven, we actually have a lot of white prowess stuff, like Clever Luminancer, really good, even Eager First Year isn't that bad as a prowess style threat, so maybe we can have, I don't know, Boros prowess, Jeskai prowess, where Leonin Lightscribe plays the Adliz roles, comes down on like turn 5, and you cast a few spells right away and are able to kill your opponent. And that's another thing to mention about this card, which I think is important. We were just talking about how Bone Crusher really good against it. One of the easiest ways to protect against that is just not play it on turn 2. If you wait until turn 3 and leave up a spell, or turn 4 and leave up a spell, then you can pump your Leonin Lightscriber in response to Bone Crusher Giant and the rest of your team, but pump it in response so it doesn't die to Bone Crusher. So that might be something to keep in mind if you do decide to play it. It might be a 2-drop that you don't have to run out on turn 2, and we've also seen somewhat similar threats be fairly powerful, like Heartfire Emulator, Abbot of Carolkeep. They're essentially both 2-drop, 2-power prowess creatures, very similar to Lightscribe, that have upsides. Heartfire Emulator can be removal, Abbot of Carolkeep has the ETB that draws you a card, so it seems possible that Leonin Lightscribe could be the next in this line of cards because its upside is it pumps your entire team, so if you can go wide, this is a really powerful effect to have in your deck. So Leonin Lightscribe, undoubtedly powerful, perhaps even powerful enough to show up in older formats in some sort of prowess or blitz style deck. But keep in mind, Bone Crusher is a concern in Standard. If you just run it out on turn 2, a huge percentage of decks have an easy 2-for-1 way to kill it. So protect it, play it slow, use it as your finisher, and in that context, I think this card can be incredibly powerful. We also got Fervent Mastery, and this is a weird one. So this is our red, like, reverse kicker card. 5 mana sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 cards, put them in your hand, shuffle, then discard 3 cards at random, or you could pay it for 4 mana. If you do, an opponent gets to discard any number of cards and draw that many cards. So a slight discount that you can take advantage of easily if your opponent's empty-handed. Otherwise, wheeling your opponent with them being in control probably isn't ideal. So this is like essentially a triple gamble mixed with a little bit of Burning Inquiry. So there's a little bit of weirdness here. And part of the weirdness is if you cast this with 0 cards in hand, it doesn't really do anything except fill your graveyard. So you really need a relatively full hand when you cast this, and then even once you do, like, sure, you're triple gambling, but then you're also Burning Inquiring yourself. So how many of the cards do you tutor for? Let's say you have 3 cards in hand when you cast this. You tutor up 3 more cards. You have 6 cards in hand, but you're going to discard half of them. Are you going to get what you want? I really have no idea. I've seen gamble screw people over a lot of times. Even with like a full hand, you gamble, you discard what you want, you get really sad. So there is risk here. You need a bunch of cards in hand, and there is risk that you're going to discard what you're looking for. On the other hand, another way to look at this card is kind of like a red Buried Alive. Let's say you're empty-handed. You cast this, you're going to tutor up 3 cards, you're going to discard those 3 cards. If you're trying to get things in your graveyard, then it goes way, way up in value. And I think that is the main home for this card. Would you play this just as a tutor in like a red commander deck? I'm not actually sure, but if you are a red commander deck and you want to tutor, but you also have graveyard synergies, then this gets really really, really good. I also wanted to point out, because a few people mentioned this, your opponent controls the 4-mana ability. So if you cast it for 4 mana, your opponent chooses how many cards to discard and draw. So it's not a combo with like Turgid. I saw a few people saying like, oh, I can use this to screw my opponent over. And it doesn't work like that. Your opponent has complete control. They can discard 0 cards. They can discard all their cards. So they get to do whatever is best for them. So you're not going to ever hurt your opponent directly with this card. In Standard, there are some synergies like Conspiracy Theorist. Want you to be discarding cards because then you can cast some of them. But really, I think this is mostly geared for red X graveyardy commander decks. That's where I think this card will shine. Would I play this in a mono red deck with 0 graveyard synergies? Maybe, but it's going to be really risky. Would I play this in a red-black deck like Chainer or Anj or Cedrus that wants to tutor but also wants cards in the graveyard? 100% all-star in those circumstances, where even if you discard something you want, chances are you can get it back with your commander or get some benefit out of it by reanimating it or something. So I really like Fervent Mastery. I think this card is a little safer than it looks. If you just read Triple Tutor, it seems really busted, but I think because it's also kind of Burning Inquiry-ing you, and who knows what'll happen. Burning Inquiry, I played a lot of Hollow One. It is a wild card. You cast it, sometimes you get 3 Hollow Ones, sometimes you discard all your lads, and you lose the game on the spot. So Fervent Mastery is going to have that chaotic, awesome randomness built into it. I think it's got potential to see play in Commander for sure, maybe in Standard, but definitely goes up in value if you have graveyard synergies to take advantage of the cards you're discarding, rather than just looking at it as like a weird tutor. Speaking of the Mastery cycle, we also got the white member, Devastating Mastery. So 2 and 4 white, a lot of white mana symbols. You can pay 2 and a white rather than pay its mana cost. If you pay 2 and a white, your opponent gets to choose 2 non-land permanents they control and return them to their hand, and then destroy all non-land permanents. So essentially, this is a harder to cast Planar Cleansing with the extra white mana in there, with the upside, quote unquote, that you can cast it for 4 mana in some scenarios, which I guess also makes it compare a little bit to Hour of Revelation. So on one hand, we didn't see Planar Cleansing or Hour of Revelation really be standard staples. They have seen a bit of play in control decks, kind of like as a one-of on occasion. The upside in our current standard is there is a good mixture of permanents that you want to destroy. Like, sure, we got, Shatter the Sky in standard, in other creature sweepers, but what if your opponent has Great Henge, or a Planeswalker like Kismina, or Showdown of the Skulls, along with a creature? Devastating Mastery is going to get the job done and sweep it away, and I think that's relevant in a world of Great Henges and Sagas and Embercleave, so all non-land permanents is a big upside. The problem is, I don't think you really want to cast this for 4 mana in standard very often. Like, think of this setup. Like, let's assume we're up against a deck that's actually playing all these cards. You cast it for 4 mana, your opponent's going to be like, okay, I will pick up my Lovestruck Beast, I will pick up my Great Henge, then your opponent untaps, and they play Lovestruck Beast, and they replay Great Henge, you blew up all your stuff, your opponent gets to keep their 2 best things. So I feel like for standard, you really got to focus on the 6 mana Planar Cleansing mode. If you're casting it for 4 mana, I think you're just like mana screwed and desperate and YOLOing it. Like, all right, I'm just going to do this. It's probably not going to work out, but I don't really have any other choice. On the other hand, a Planar Cleansing can be pretty effective in Commander, and I like the way this is worded in Commander. There are a lot of good white sweepers in Commander, which is kind of my concern with this card. Hour of Revelation, a Steward Command, Onto Inversion, Wrath of God. There's a lot of way to blow everything up in white and Commander. Is Devastating Mastery going to be good enough to make the cut? I'm not really sure, although I do like that you're only choosing an opponent. So only one opponent gets to mount stuff, and it can be a political tool to make a friend for later in the game. You're like, all right, I'll let you pick up 2 of your things. However, I'm going to blow up everything else. Get me back later. So maybe that'll give it a shot. But I am a little concerned that we just have so many good sweepers. Like, Hour of Revelation is really strong in Commander because there's always going to be 10 or more non-land permanents pretty early in the game, and that blows up everything, and that's still not like an ultra staple. So I'm not really sure where Devastating Mastery lands. I think it's a sweet design. In Standard, the 6 mana mode could be worth it. Skeptical of casting it for 4 mana in Standard. In Commander, the 4 mana mode can be fine as a political tool, but again, there's a lot of white sweepers this is competing with. Whether or not this makes the cut as a generic sweeper in a generic deck, That remains to be seen. I lean towards no, but I do really like how it can work politically. We also got Emergent Sequence, and this card's pretty interesting. 1 and a green, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So first off, that looks like rampant growth. Like, that's rampant growth in Standard. We haven't seen that in a decade. Wizard says it's too good for Standard, and after getting dominated by ramp for the last couple of years, I don't know, it probably actually is too good. So it starts off looking like rampant growth. The problem is, the land becomes a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token that's still a land. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each land you had enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So let's say on turn 2 you take in, play a land, Emergent Sequence, tutor out a land. You're essentially going to get a 2-mana mana dork. You're going to get a Leaf Gilder, a Servant of the Conduit, a Werebear, a 2-mana 2/2 that can tap for mana, which is nice, but I think this is a huge drawback. I saw a couple people say, wow, this is better rampant growth. I actually think being creature is a massive, massive drawback because it means it's a rampant growth that dies to Bone Crusher. I think that's the theme of Strixhaven. Even your rampant growths get got by Bone Crusher. So I'm not actually sure I would play this as a generic ramp spell. Like, 2-mana mana dorks are okay. Are they okay in a world of Bone Crusher? I'm not exactly sure. On the other hand, there are some synergies to make this good. Like, if you are playing a landfall style deck and having multiple lands come into play under your control this turn, then it becomes pretty exciting. Like, if you're playing a landfall deck, let's say, in Scape Shifting or Fallothing, and you're having a bunch of lands come into play in the same turn, then all of a sudden, this is making a pretty big creature for 2 mana, which is a big upside. You can double the counters with Doubling Season, or grow it with Tansy or Quandrix. So there are synergies for it, and I think that's the idea of this card. If you just want to ramp, I don't know if this is good enough in our current Standard format, but if you have synergies, I think this can actually be a pretty powerful effect. So real unique design that I like. Just don't think of it like a rampant growth. Think of it like a 2-mana mana dork in Standard. A 2-mana mana dork that gets got by Bone Crusher, but with the right synergies, a pretty powerful ramp spell. We also got Accomplished Alchemist, a card that can add a ridiculous amount of mana. So 4 mana 2/5, Elf Druid, tap to add a mana of any color, or tap to add X mana of 1 color, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So in a life gain deck, this is one of the most broken ramp spells I've ever seen. Let's say you're trying to pull off that Crackle with Power Kill that we were talking about earlier, where you gotta get 14 mana. Well, all of a sudden, like, life goes on, especially if you had a creature die. It's gaining you 8 life. 8 life, that means your Accomplished Alchemist for 1 mana investment is gonna tap for 8 more mana. In Standard, like food tokens. Food tokens cost 2 to sacrifice and gain you 3 life. They essentially turn into like pyretic rituals. You crack them and then Accomplish Alchemist gets you back even more mana than you spent cracking them. There's Grey Merchants, there's Zenith Flares. So there are ways to turn this into one of the most busted mana dorks in the history of Magic. And it's worth mentioning, it is a pretty good blocker. Like in Standard, 5 toughness stops a Bone Crusher guy. It stops a Clothis, stops basically everything in mono red minus Ember Cleaving, everything out of mono white minus like a Maul this Skyclave being on it. So it is a relatively good defensive body. On the other hand, in Standard, I just don't know. It is a card you gotta play for 4 mana. It has to sit out on the battlefield for a turn, and then you have to have life gain effects to really power it up, and then you have to have something big to cast with all the mana it makes. Oh, is that better than just slamming a Questing Beast? I would say in most decks, the answer is going to be no. It is a slow card. Expensive mana dorks aren't typically staples, even if they're powerful. On the other hand, if you are playing a green-based life gain deck in Commander, this is a legitimate all-star. Lathel, Tristati, Urka, Willow Dusk, a new addition from Strixhaven itself. If you're playing a commander that gains a bunch of life, and that's what your deck's about, this card is absurd. You just gain a bunch of life, which you're doing anyway, and then you cast a huge Genesis Wave or something, or a huge Green Sun Zenith, and win the game. So I think this is a commander all-star. I think it's like a fun build-around for Standard, but I would be surprised if it showed up in real top-tier competitive decks, just because once you get up to like 4 or 5 mana in green, the competition is really intense for like powerful powerful threats that do things immediately, when Accomplished Alchemist gotta sit around for a turn. So love it for Commander, not 100% sure for Standard, although I do want to build a fun budgeter against odds style deck around it. We also got one of my favorite cards from the set, Augmenter Puglist and Echoing Equation MDFC front side, 3 mana 3/3 with trample. It's a troll druid, and then once you get up to 8 or more lands, it becomes an 8/8 with trample, which that's actually kind of a scary card. And then the backside, this is the part of the card I love. Echoing Equation, 5 mana sorcery. Choose target creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until ended turn, except those creatures aren't legendary if you choose a legendary. So that's the part that makes me excited about this card. We've seen cards like this. Augmenter Puglist is kind of like Kazandu Mammoth. Does have some upside in a ramp deck, but I'm really excited about Echoing Equation. Mirror Weave is like a really funny combo piece, but it has that legendary restriction, which can be an issue. Echoing Equation gets around that. So in Standard, what do you do with this card? I don't know. I assume you play it as a creature because it's relatively on curve, but then sometimes you got a bunch of creatures and you're like, oh, they're all questing beasts now. You're dead. They're all Gargaroths now. Make a ton of beasts or draw a ton of cards. They're all Tear of the Peaks. I play something else. Burn you out. So I assume just like make a bunch of questing beasts or Gargaroths is like the competitive way to play the card, but this card can do some funny, fun things too. Like make a bunch of creatures, play a Toski, turn all your creatures into Toskis, attack with them all, draw your entire deck, play a Thassa's Oracle to win, or maybe like Finn the Fangbear, the ability stack up. If you make a million Finns and they all attack, your opponent's going to get a ton of poison counters. In Historic, I really want to try it with Atrata. Atrata's a really hard card to make work because it shuffles in when it deals combat damage, but if you can make a bunch of things into Atratas all at once, your opponent has 3 creatures, you attack, you hit counter them all, your opponent loses the game on the spot. So that's what makes me excited about this card. In Commander, the problem is it's a Simic card, which does narrow the decks it can go into, but some commanders it could work well with are ones that have combat damage triggers, attack triggers, like Xyrus, for example. When it deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each draw a card, and you get to make snake tokens. So you make a bunch of snakes, turn all of your snakes into Xyruses, then you attack and like mill your opponents out and make even more snakes, maybe Edric to just draw a ton of cards. So I love Echoing Equation. I think this card is super fun, and having a front side that's a relatively on-curve creature is going to make it a lot easier to sneak into decks. Like, you can play this for the front half, and then you kind of get the back half as a free roll, and sometimes maybe you do that really funny, crazy stuff where you make everything a Gargaroth and win the game with it. So, one of my favorite cards from the set, one of my favorite MDFCs of all time. We also got Silverquill Silencer, a 2-mana Orzhov 3/2 human cleric. When it enters a battlefield, choose a non-land card name. Whenever opponent casts a spell with that name, they lose 3 life and you draw a card. So at first glance, this kind of looks like a Meddling Mage. It starts off with a lot of the same text, although there's some pretty big differences. Meddling Mage, if you name Wrath of God or Shatter the Sky, your opponent can't cast it. Silverquill Silencer, it's not that strong of a hate card. Like, if you name Shatter the Sky in Standard, your opponent, yeah, they're going to have to let you draw a card and take 3, but they're still going to Wrath away your board. So I don't think this is a Meddling Mage style lock piece, but I think this can still be a solid tempo play. It is a cleric, so maybe there's a cleric deck or just an Orzhov aggro deck where you play this and you're trying to kill your opponent aggressively anyway, and 3 life and draw a card if your opponent wraths. That's still a really big deal. So I feel like this is a really competitively costed 2-drop. I'd be surprised if it made it in Modern. I don't know. You can play actual Meddling Mage in Modern, and I think that's more upside if you're trying to play Modern Humans or something like that. But for Standard or Historic, it seems like a pretty on-curve 2-drop that has some nice upside, a good tempo play, so keep it in mind for Clerics or for Orzhov aggro. So not a lock piece like Meddling Mage, but a solid tempo-y Orzhov 2-drop. We also got Dream Strix, which is one of the more on-curve learn cards. 2-mana 3/2 flyer. When it becomes a target of a spell, sack it. When it dies, you get to learn, tutor up a lesson from your sideboard. One of the things I like about this card, and I don't think this is like super duper standard playable, but if there is actually like a learn lesson deck, then this will probably be a part of it. I do like that this fizzles adventure cards. A lot of the removal in Standard is like Bone Crusher, Brazen Borrower. If your opponent targets your Dream Strix with Bone Crusher Giant, Dream Strix sacrifices, which means, yeah, Bone Crusher still killed it, but at least it's not going to go on an adventure and come back as a 3-4 and kill you later. So there is some weird upside against adventure-based removal, and we have been kind of getting better learn cards. Nothing really busted, but like Necrotic Fumes, close to being a good removal spell. Teachings of the Archaics we talked about yesterday. So the more better learn cards we get, and the more better lessons we get, I don't know, maybe there's a chance it can actually work. Also worth pointing out, if you're playing Illusion Tribal, probably going to make the deck. In Illusion Tribal, you need all the on-curve evasive illusions you can get. Lord of the Unreal, really good Lord for an illusion deck. So, I don't know, maybe it's time for Modern Illusions to make a comeback. So, Dream Strix, still skeptical of learning and lessons, but out of all the learn cards we've seen, this is probably near the top of the heap. We also got Test of Talent, which is a legitimately awesome counter spell. Hopefully can have a big impact on Standard. 1 in a blue instant, counter target instant or sorcery, search its controller's graveyard, hand, library for any number of cards with the same name as that spell. Exile them, player shuffles, draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So essentially, this is like a miscast mixed with like a Necromentia style effect. Like you're paying 1 more mana than miscast, but you get a hard counter, and more importantly, you get rid of all the copies of the card forever. So if you're tired of getting Emergent Ultimatum, or tired of getting Genesis Ultimatum, or tired of your opponent wrathing your board with your Tempo-y aggro deck, this doesn't just stop one of the cards you're scared of, this is going to stop all the copies of that card forever. Plus, I mean, miscast has already been seeing play. This is only 1 more mana, so it's not a huge deal to make this work in your deck. It's very on curve. So Test of Talent, I think this is a card that potentially has possibilities across formats. It can fight decks like Storm in Modern. It can fight all the big spells and ultimatums we have in Standard. Not very good in Commander, where your decks are all singleton, but outside of Commander, really solid hate card / surgical extraction / necromentia / counterspell. We also got one of my personal favorite cards from this set, Double Major, green and a blue instant, copy target creature spell you control, except it isn't legendary if this spell is legendary. So essentially, this is kind of like a Spark Double, except it's 2 mana. Another comparison, Phantasmal Image, a 2 mana clone. So this is one of the cheapest ways to clone something. The twist is, you gotta have the mana available while the creature is on the stack, because you need to be able to copy it before it hits the battlefield. But this is still a really cheap way to make a clone with the Spark Double upside of not caring if you're copying a legendary. So if you want to win with Biovisionary, it's a sweet way to add a copy to the battlefield, or just use it for value, like copying your Muldrifter, or Cloudblazer, or Ravenous Chupacabra, kind of giving you like a little Pandermonicon trigger, one-shot Pandermonicon trigger that leaves behind a body. Seems pretty sweet, and because it doesn't care about legends, this could be a really sweet card in Simic Commander decks. Like, imagine having 2 Tetyovas on the battlefield for 7 mana instead of 1 for 5 mana. You're gonna draw so many cards and gain so much life, or like Asai or Rashmi. So Double Major, this is just a really fun card. I would be surprised if this is like a top tier Standard staple or anything like that. But good lord, is this one of the cards that I am most excited to resolve from the entire set. We also got Fracture, a new sideboard all-star, white and a black instant, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. So essentially a disenchant with a little bit of Hero's Downfall mixed in. And disenchant is still close to being a sideboard playable card, really across formats. It is not that far behind the other options. Adding in destroy a planeswalker is a huge upside. Now your hate for Rest in Peace and your hate for Chalice of the Void can also snipe a Teferi or something, a Jace. That seems like a great deal, so I think this will be a sideboard all-star in Standard and probably in older formats as well. So really, really awesome design. We also got Show of Confidence, which I guess is white Grape Shot, 1 and a white instant. When you cast this spell, copy it for each other instant or sorcery spell that you've cast this turn. You can choose new targets for the copy, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it gains vigilance in the turn. So essentially, it's limited to instants and sorceries, but you can't copy them, so it's like a Magecraft instant. And then, if you can cast 20 spells and have a evasive creature, it's a Grape Shot. Like 20 spells, Grape Shot kills you, 20 spells plus evasive creature, this kills you. Is this like a broken card that's going to dominate Standard? I don't know. I mean, Storm cards are always better than they look. Even though this has a lot of hoops to jump through compared to actual Grape Shot, this might actually be kind of good if there's some sort of deck that can pull it off. We also got Umbral Juke, just a solid removal spell, really. A 3-mana instant. Target player sacks a creature or planeswalker, or you can choose make a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying. So for 3 mana, you're essentially getting to the slaughter, which is already kind of on curve for a edict effect. And you get the option to get a Namana Skydancer, I guess, like a flash 2/1 flyer. No additional upsides, but the flexibility is really nice. You leave this up on your opponent's turn. If you got an edict, great, you get value out of that. If you don't have to edict, you can get a 2/1 flash flyer and start beating down. So that flexibility is super huge. I think this card is actually a really solid uncommon. We also got Secret Rendezvous and Wizard. Powering up White and Commander. 3 mana, you and target opponent each draw 3 cards. So there's our white draw 3. The problem is solved. We can stop complaining about it. Seriously though, this card's not very good. The problem with these cards is you're the one playing the card and spending the mana. So think of how this works in practice. You're like, haha, gotta draw some cards with my white deck. Secret Rendezvous. You're gonna be down a card and down 3 mana, you're going to draw 3 cards, which is kind of 2 cards because you spent the Secret Rendezvous. And then your opponent is just like, 3 cards, no mana. That's perfect. So technically, you're plus 2 cards and negative 3 mana when your opponent's plus 3 cards. It benefits your opponent more than you. That's the problem with these effects. If Wizards wants these multiple people draw card effects to actually help solve the problem with white drawing cards in Commander, it needs to not be fully symmetrical. It needs to be you draw 3 and your opponent draws 2, or you draw 3 and your opponent draws 1, something like that, because why would you ever cast a card that helps your opponent more than you unless you're playing a group hug style deck? So it's, I don't know, a cute card, it's got some flavor, but boy is it not a good card draw spell. We also got Decisive Rejection. Speaking of miscast style effects, and this is an uncommon that I really like. So blue and a green instant. Target creature you control fights a creature you don't control, so a pounce essentially. And counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3. A miscast, so you're getting a counter spell and a removal spell smashed into 1 for 2 mana at instant speed. Seems like a relatively playable effect. Another good comparison, Teamer Charm. Very similar to that, but 1 less color, 1 less mana. So I think Decisive Rejection actually has potential to be playable. It has a lot of flexibility. Being a bad negate and a bad removal spell means that it's good against creature decks, it's good against control decks, and that's what you want out of your sideboard slots, and it could even be a main deck card. Otherwise, I mentioned we keep getting more lessons and more lured cards. Some of them are not that bad. I still haven't gotten to the point where I expect these cards to show up in best of 3, but we're getting closer. It feels like a lot of the really weak ones were spoiled first. Also got a pretty sweet Orzhov enchantment, Dramatic Final. So 4 mana, all Orzhov hybrid. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1, and whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, create a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying, which, if you have Dramatic Final out, will actually be a 3/2. Trigger this ability only once each turn, so no real combo potential because of that restriction. However, this is like a cross between an Intangible Virtue and an Open the Grave, with little combo potential. Open the Grave, you can do some shenanigans. Can't really do shenanigans with Dramatic Final, but you do get even better tokens, like having a non-token die and getting a 3/2 is really, really strong. That's a lot of value, punishing your opponent for removing your creatures. So this is a really unique token card. On one hand, if you're playing it with traditional token makers like Lingering Souls, Spectral Possession, it's kind of just a bad anthem because you're not going to have non-token creatures to die. On the other hand, it works really well with creatures that also make tokens. Like in Standard, Clarion Spirit, it happens to be a creature, it also happens to make tokens, so then you take advantage of both halves of Dramatic final. Like, you're pumping the tokens that Clarion Spirit makes, which is good, and if your opponent kills your Clarion Spirit, well, you're getting a 2-1 that'll be a 3-2 flyer out of the deal. Same with, like, Hero Precinct 1, Afterlife cards like Tithe Taker, so there are some sweet ways to take advantage of this fact, but I don't think I'd play it in a dedicated token deck. I think you need that creature token mix. Also, there's a few commanders where this seems absolutely perfect. Probably the best is Tisa Orzhov Scion, which likes white and black creatures. It likes tokens. It even likes to kill white creatures to exile your opponent's stuff, so then you're having non-tokens die potentially to make more white and black creatures. Absolutely ideal for Tisa. Also, like, Alenda seems like a pretty good option. Aleo, Artful Provocateur, maybe for Brawl or in Commander. So Dramatic Final, I like this card. I can definitely see uses for it. While 4 mana is a bit too much for the Anthem effect, it does have a lot of upside if you build your deck around that second ability, where it's just going to be super obnoxious for your opponent to be able to deal with your stuff, because when they kill your stuff, you're getting more stuff, and that stuff's actually evasive and pretty big. So, kind of a weird take on Anthem, but a very powerful take on Anthem in the right deck. Otherwise, ton of lower rarity stuff. Good stuff for Limited, maybe some okay stuff for Commander, but way too much stuff for us to break down fully because, oh my god, so many cards being spoiled each day. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Strixhaven spoilers for today. So, what do you think about Body of Research? How good is a casual 45-45 for 6? Is not having a converted mana cost, being bad against bounce spells enough to keep it down? Or is the fact that you can just fling it and win the game instantly, or Simic Ascendancy, enough to make it good? What about Crackle with power? Like, is it too expensive? Do you need too much mana? Or is the fact it's 14 mana, kill your opponent, is that enough to let it see play in Standard? Is it a commander card? Leonin Lightscribe, can it overcome the hurdle of Bone Crusher killing it through its powerful mass prowess magecraft ability? What about the reverse kicker stuff? Fervent Mastery. Is that 3 gambles? Can it show up in Standard? Do you got to be a graveyard deck? What about Devastating Mastery? Is it ever worth casting for 4 mana? Can it be a White Wrath in Commander? How about Emergent Sequence? Is that the return of Rampant Growth to Standard? Or is the fact that your land token thing gonna die too much of a drawback? Accomplish Alchemist? Can that make mana in Standard? Or is it a life gain Commander card? What about Echoing Equations? What do you want to turn all of your things into? Silverquill Silencer? Is that the return of Meddling Mage? Is that a tempo card that can show up in older formats? All the other stuff as well. Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Dying for more spoiler coverage? Well, we've got you covered with daily spoiler videos every single day during spoiler season. Plus, you can always find the latest by heading over to mtgpreviews.com.